This is the Go Maluku podcast.
What's good, everyone? Ghazali O'Harrell here, Tabea. Respectful greetings. It's Day 2 of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, the 20th session, entirely virtual. And because of that, Indigenous peoples are used to go to the Permanent Forum in New York. Obviously, last year, because of the start of the global crisis or the pandemic, the session was postponed, and this year the Permanent Forum is hosting it virtually. Yes, it's already kicked off its whole agenda on Monday by opening remarks. Obviously, one of the most, not most, but one of the remarkable contributors to the opening session was obviously the Secretary of the Interior of the United States of America, Her Excellency Deb Haaland. And for the first time, actually, at least in my experience, the current Secretary General of the United Nations made his give a presented message to the opening session of the Permanent Forum. Obviously, and then they segued into a discussion on item 3. And today we had a conversation on, first we kicked off with the introduction of the study on climate change and what was it again, to be exact, study on the theme climate change and Indigenous peoples, presented by our dear sister Hindou Oumarou Ibrahim, new member of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and continue with the discussion on the theme of this session, being peace, justice, and strong institutions, the role of Indigenous peoples in implementing the Sustainable Development Goal number 16. That was what we went through yesterday and today. Or let me kick it back a little bit. It is this is the green room, meaning that Indigenous peoples and allies can just drop in, share thoughts. You can do it in the comments, but you all can also get into the live stream itself, just about the agenda of the day, your thoughts, advice, maybe any takeaways from today's session, and pretty much anything that you want to do. I'm doing this because for many Indigenous peoples, we're looking forward to the Permanent Forum. Every year, we look forward to the Permanent Forum as a place where we can gather as Indigenous peoples, and not only to speak truth to power, influence policy and decision-making processes, but also connect with one another. This year, it is hardly possible for one to meet one another. You have a whole wide range of side events. So please, I recommend you to also look at the list of side events if there is anything that you would like to track or follow or watch. And you can do it from your own bed or your own living room, wherever you are, morning, day, or night. So that's what you can do. But also, like the biggest thing why Indigenous peoples go to the UN is obviously to be able to present that 2 to 3 minute statement. And Indigenous peoples, time is gold to us when we attend these meetings. And it is also super important that we, when we get to that point, and when we get on the speakers list, that we are able to voice our concerns, and also able to provide any recommendations towards the United Nations, and in this case, the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, to help them with making changes on the ground through international policies and recommendations. What you see right now, and what there's many Indigenous people signed up. Because of it's virtual, there's not many Indigenous people that can actually participate, get on the speakers list. I've received last week a lot of emails by Indigenous peoples, being concerned that they were not able to, or they were not chosen to present a statement. Obviously, you have to deal as a Permanent Forum. I can understand that you have to deal with the interpreters and the time you allocated through across time zones, and I get that. But there's a lot of concerns and a lot of disappointment amongst Indigenous peoples. Hence why this whole idea was started on Clubhouse, a new app that has emerged, a audio only conversation social media platform. And that we've been using that as to connect with one another. And then last Sunday, Brandon Makaava, would you also, if you watched the stream of the Perm Forum, he presented on behalf of the nation of Hawaii, and he come up as well as Monica De Oro from Chamorro from Guam. We need a UN green room. We need a place where we as Indigenous peoples can, outside of the UN, just come together and discuss topic and talk about things. That's a long-winded way of saying what this actually is. This should not be a monologue. I've been talking already for way too long. But it is open. You can. It is an open process. This green room, meaning that there's a link in the description. If you want to say something, if you say that, if you agree with me, you can do it in the comments, obviously, or you disagree with me, you can do it in the comments. However, to have a conversation that we usually have at the Perm Forum, I invite you to come up to the live stream. There's a link in the description, and you can just click on a link, and you go into the green room of the green room, and then I'll bring you onto the screen, and we'll just can talk about whatever you want, share whatever you want to share. If you, like I said, if you agree with me, you can say that, or if you think I should stand in the corner and uppercut myself, you can say that as well. Or if you have any good ideas, or if you have anything that you would like to Indigenous peoples to think about, given the agenda of the day, or the agenda that is to come within the Perm Forum on Indigenous issues. So that is what this whole green room idea is meant to do. It's just a platform for you to talk if you would like to talk. So please do click on that link. I would appreciate it, because otherwise I've been talking to myself the whole time. I do not like that at all. And I'd like to ask questions, and I'd like to hear your opinion as well on several issues. So, and we'll keep on doing this for the next couple of days. So this is day one, and we'll do it until, I believe, the Tuesday or the Wednesday next week. After every meeting, depending obviously when the meeting ends. Because today they went a little bit into overtime. So when the meeting ends, and then a couple of minutes after that, we'll go live. So that is what this whole the role of how should I do it? How we're trying to provide this platform. All right, that is enough about the about why I'm doing the green room. And now let's get into a little bit into the events of the day today. There are several things that happened today, and some things that were discussed that intrigued me somewhat. Some words that it was mentioned, the radicalization of Indigenous peoples, or connected to Indigenous peoples. I think that is an interesting topic to talk about. When you look at Sustainable Development Goal 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions, you heard references from Indigenous peoples saying that we already have our governing institutions. We have our institutions for peace and justice. We already have that. You need, as a state, you just need to recognize that. That is one of the things that you heard, that I heard. And I'm paraphrasing as I try to process everything that's been discussed. Also, there's been some discussions about obviously the climate change in connection to climate change, and I heard peaceful resistance. That's interesting. Uluru's statement from the heart. It's a call for self-determination to the government of Australia. However, you also see that a counter move of the government of Australia of setting up structures that could undermine Indigenous people's right to self-determination. And there's many more things that has been discussed, and so I just want you to process what's been discussed today. Parallel to that, however, as I see some people joining the conversation, parallel to that is the UN's Human Rights Committee to announce to monitor Sami people's right to in expedited procedure. Highlight, the headline is April 1st, 2021, the United Nations Human Rights Committee issued its findings and recommendations to Finland on the realization of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The committee will monitor the implementation of the recommendations on the rights of the Sami indigenous people in an expedited procedure. So I'd like to put that on your radar. So what has been discussed today, as well as the this development at the UN Human Rights Committee, and there's someone that obviously is much better that can talk at length about that. The person that's been for further information, seek Thomas Aslak-Yuso, and I'll bring him up into the screen. Thomas, welcome. I really hope that your camera is dead, or if you just want to do conference audio only, that's fine by me as well. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good, and my internet connection today is a bit bad. I have had problems using the camera, so sorry for that. Maybe tomorrow is a better day. I'm fine. It's been a work day now behind from 10 hours now, and finally starting to a little bit more relaxed.
Good, man. You're president of the Sami Parliament in Finland. Obviously, if people don't know, they know now. What would you like to touch upon? Would you like to touch upon the message that I just now read about the Human Rights Committee, or any reflections on Permanent Forum in general, or today's agenda item? Where does your mind go?
Well, I'm open to talk almost everything in the context you want to discuss, but of course, the announcement that we published today in English about the Human Rights Council is very much in our minds right now, and of course the legislative work here in the Finnish context are undergoing, and that is of course in our big priority to try to resolve the matter that the state of Finland could be able to move away from the human rights violation that has been done now in regarding the Civil and Political Rights Convention. Right. But of course, Permanent Forum, I've been listening now for the session, and interesting topics. I think that peace, justice, and strong institutions is a big topic, of course, and of course, right to self-determination is a big part of the decision that I was talking about on the violation of the civil and political rights. That was also today raised in many different ways. So interesting discussions, and I've been following and listening quite closely.
Right. So when you talk about the agenda, let's start with the agenda of the day, or the theme of the Permanent Forum. And today we've been talking about peace, justice, and strong institutions. As how do you interpret the agenda item as a parliamentarian, as a president of the Sami Parliament in Finland? Anything that you would like to share within the UN context, or with Indigenous peoples in general?
Well, of course, today's discussions have been reflecting the need for fully respect on the right to self-determination and right to assemble and right to form your own institutions, and that the counterpartners and states would have to really listen to those institutions, and through that develop and moreover take steps on developing indigenous issues. That is, of course, one of the core messages of today. But it's always a question how the self-determinational issues are done in specificities, and that is always tied to the situation, the nation. There are always different kind of situations that you have to take into account. But otherwise, the topics of self-determination can be really difficult to tackle in 2 minutes. So that is, of course, the restriction that the permanent forum session builds quite strongly when you are trying to speak about a topic that is so big and in many levels.
Mm-hmm. So let me bring up one example that was presented by the representative of the New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council. And there's the Uluru Statement from the Heart that comes from Indigenous people themselves on a call for self-determination to the government of Australia. Like I said, there's also a counter move from the government itself to undermine, and it's as how they interpret it, as undermining the self-determination of Indigenous peoples, as in a how should I put it, as a advisory role, and not so much as a real counterpartner, as a partner in decision making, really going into the right to self-determination. Unfortunately, that is not an incident. You see that more and more around in the Indigenous world, where Indigenous peoples have their own government institutions, their own structures, and then you see a government counter move by creating a commission, a committee, or council, or whatever, as a way of doing it on their terms. Is that it's a two-part question? One, is that a trend? Do you also see the trend? And second, do you see something similar in Sami land, in Sapmi, maybe on the Finnish side, or if not, what are you doing to prevent that from happening?
Well, it's you have so many levels in the questions. It might take some time to try to answer that.
Sure.
But the right to self-determination, of course, is core on the matter. But I don't think that there is any easy way to build the representative institutions or get the recognition to the institutions that are already in place. The work, at least here on the Finnish side of Sapmi, and with the to reach to the levels where we are right now, and still there are steps to be taken in the future. And the Sami Parliament in Finland, or the first version of it, Sami delegation, was established.
Tuomas, your connection is a little bit you coming in broken, and now it's completely silent. So maybe you should go in and out. Maybe into the conference, go in and out of this conversation, and maybe hold on. Maybe let me try this. No. Still haven't. Yeah, we'll wait for I'll wait for Tuomas to come back. Hopefully, when his connection improves. So Tuomas is talking about self-determination. It's a super interesting topic. That, and not only interesting, but I would say like the backbone of indigenous rights. Let's park that for when Tuomas comes back to go a little deeper into that. I see in the comments that there was some concerns about the process itself. Right. So they didn't go according to the speakers list. It just changed the way people were going to speak, but most of us only seen instructions after it was almost done. And yeah, the last minute changes to speaking process was really not acceptable. So there's obviously there's a lot. How should I say it? How should I put it? Like for us to learn, at least for the UN side, to learn about conducting these international virtual meetings, to say the least. Obviously, as I wanted, but it is obviously a concern if these peoples all around the world are waiting for their turn to speak, and yeah, there's obviously a speakers list, and they focus on the speakers list, and then for some reason they had to shuffle it, or they had to change it. I'm not sure. I cannot look into the minds of the Secretariat as well as the current chair of the Perm Forum, Anne Norgrim. And yeah, so by all means, folks, if you're in the comments, please come. You're okay. I invite you to come up and have this discussion as well, to talk more about the organizational matters, and other things that have been discussed today. All right, Thomas, you're back. Hopefully your connection is better.
Hopefully it will now be more stable.
Right. So you were talking about the self-determination. That's where you left off before you your audio went off.
Yeah, I mean the steps to take to build and strengthen and getting recognition for the institutions that are having functions of self-governance or representation is always a road to build. But I think that the Australian example that was raised today is one good example where states' role are big, and in every part the states' roles need the recognition part at least, and to be to a certain extent successful. Of course, there can be many different successful stories without that, but of course that builds some possibilities, I would say, at least here in the Finnish side it has been, and in the Sami context it has been seen as beneficial. But the state side, where the state has been not supporting fully the institutions that there has been, and now in statements read, it was clearly raised that the willingness and the need for representative institutions are there, but they need a support from the state side, and certain clauses there. So I think that is a good example to hear also, and that highlights also the responsibility of the states.
Something that also came up, sorry, so let me rephrase the question. Any other interesting elements that you heard today that you would like to ponder about a little bit about, to process or talk about?
Well, there were many different statements. There were a lot of interesting issues. I was more listening to, and of course, to me, the statement from the Inuits was something that I paid a close attention, of course, and I think it was a good start for the actual topics of the session and so forth.
Anything that you're looking, that you're hoping to hear, because this agenda item will come back throughout the 2 weeks at some point, I believe. Is there anything that you're looking forward to hearing from maybe just as an Indigenous person, or also in your capacity as president of the Summer Parliament in Finland?
Well, of course, the strong institutions and and institutions that have representative natures in different ways are interested to be heard, and in what kind of situations indigenous peoples are in different world. For us as a representative institution, it's of course interesting to identify others that are in the world, and also trying to build connections and cooperation is something that is in our interest with this topic. And so I'm hoping that the in-depth discussions in self-determination, representation, self-governance, what are the basic core elements for strong institutions, is brought maybe even more further up and discussed. There were some, I think, really good comments made by Mr. Barume. Of course, to a certain extent, indigenous peoples have been talking the same kind of points for a long time, but it is good always to highlight those topics and points of views. And I think they were beneficial for the discussions upcoming in the week. And I hope truly that even more further or in-depth discussions on self-determinations are brought up during the weeks.
Yeah, interesting. Obviously, Albert Barumi, former expert member of the expert mechanism on the rights of indigenous peoples, currently working for the UN Security Council as a coordinator of the panel of experts on Mali. And paraphrasing, obviously, his main message was, or not a message, but more like as a question, like how can we convince the Security Council and member states to see indigenous peoples as partners and at the same time as prime victims of radicalism and extremism. Interesting element that he brought up into this whole dialogue. Indigenous peoples would talk about self-determination, would talk about their own institutions. He introduced something that obviously he sees emerging in his work as working for the Security Council, that extremism affecting the indigenous peoples, and his urge for states that need to see indigenous peoples as partners to fight extremism, and also one thing that he brought up was that the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it proposes a new partnership between indigenous peoples and states. However, states call indigenous peoples extremists or terrorists in some cases around the world, and he is looking for a reset between in relationships between indigenous peoples and states. And I find it a very interesting contribution, intervention into the whole conversation, as the element of radicalism and extremism that is obviously or that he introduced in this intervention. Question, this is what I see in the messenger groups, and it's also like, what is extremism, what is radicalism? So love for people to weigh in on that as well. Yeah, I think when it comes to that, Thomas, and let me pick your brain a little bit about that. Is a reset required in terms of partnerships between indigenous peoples and states? If you look at it around the world right now, is that what we need to do, or would you use a different word for that? At least I would. I don't like to use the word reset, but again, I think reset is a buzzword right now that's going around the world. You heard the chair of the Perm Forum say building back better, This is what you said yesterday in the remarks, and today then reset. It could also be connected to the Great Reset. Thomas, anything that you in your observations as international representative?
Well, I understand the point of a reset, because building connections and building cooperation would need mutual respect and certain kind of equality in a floor of discussions, and I'm not sure whether states currently are approaching the indigenous peoples representation, self-government, in an aspect that would allow certain developments to happen, but I do though see that radicalism and different kind of aspects of it are a big issue on or obstacle in successfully implementing and fulfilling the right of self-determination of indigenous peoples. Especially, for example, here on the Finnish side, we do live in areas where Finnish settlers have located themselves already in the beginnings of 1600s, and the radicalism also is seen in ways that the local other peoples in our areas have started to use more aggressive language to our needs or towards our proposals, and in that context, it is difficult to move away and move forward on fulfilling and implementing the right to self-determination if the atmosphere is that. So in certain context, I do understand what the reset might mean, and I did understand it, that there needs to be a re-establishment of connection, respect, and so forth, because through that and through dialogue, we can find common solutions on all issues, and that I think it's needed. If the connection is already in a dominant way or not respectful, it is difficult to move forward and build common solutions. So I think that when we are talking about also peace and justice, I think that is an important part of the issue.
Yeah, great. I put myself on mute. Yeah, thanks. And I think clarifies a lot, gives a better perspective for me in terms of the use of the word reset. As in my mind, it goes when people say reset, I'm always critical, if not skeptical, about on whose terms, and making sure that reset it goes back to a equal footing, right? And I think that's the whole idea. So when a institution like the UN utters the word reset, alarm bells go off, at least in my head. So your explanation of it makes a lot more sense if it is also seen in that through that perspective. I think also what's interesting was the when you talk about the relationship between, because I think that's the core of it, right? The relationship between the state as well as indigenous peoples through their own representative institutions. So in the Sami context, that could be the parliaments, and in other contexts, it could be councils, assemblies, and et cetera, et cetera. there's the need for a dialogue, and one of the how should I put it, a recommendation that was made yesterday, I think, in the study from former a member of the Permanent Forum, Jens Dahl, was to facilitating dialogue between Indigenous peoples and states for autonomy and self-government, and that there should be maybe there's a role for the Permanent Forum in there to write any guidelines, which is an interesting development, and I hope, it is my hope that Indigenous peoples themselves really weigh into this a process when you establish guidelines, that you're part of the process and not just leave it up to the experts, but really participate in these conversations and provide advice on like what kind of guidelines you would like to see, if this is going to going to move forward, get any traction. So that is something that I've also was also interesting. Interesting also was the USA's contribution. The representative of the United States said that President Biden was contributing $4 billion to Indian country. And I really don't like what that they said Indian country, but maybe that is the current way of explaining that. I don't know. I'm not from Turtle Island, so I only go off to what she said. To come and $4 billion to combat COVID-19. Obviously, Navajo Nation and was one of the COVID-19 hotspots in the United States, if not still is. They're super concerned, obviously, with the health and well-being of the Navajo Nation and all Indigenous peoples around the world. I do hear some messages that some Indigenous communities have a surplus of COVID-19 vaccines, so they're inviting other people to go to their tribes and to their communities and take the vaccine shots. Anyway, but that's not the interesting part of it. It was the how she ended the statement was that the U.S. government will continue to, quote unquote, seek input from Indigenous peoples and build towards building peace around the world. I don't know. It triggered me a little bit when I talk about seeking input, whereas participation, when we talk about strong institutions, when we talk about peace and justice, that collaboration on equal level it goes beyond input. It goes to partnership and having being at the table and being part of solutions and designing policies. That is was that Thomas, was that do I read too much into it, seek input, or did you read it in a different way, or did that also hit your radar?
It's always interesting to see what is the USA's approach after administration changes, and to just give a little bit of slack, I think that they might be still looking a bit of their language and developing how they are going to approach and talk about issues. At least I hope. Terminology use, of course, is something that it's important to agree with the Indigenous peoples from the region and from the area. Yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant to try to interpret something. What would USA mean with that? Hopefully, that is a signal from the new administration that they are willing to take proposals and are willing to have a dialogue with indigenous peoples inside the areas where USA currently located.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I hope that that was their main message with it. It would be interesting to hear from indigenous peoples representatives from that area how they see and read that specific statement. I think that this is really relevant also in a little bit different process that what we are also working globally on and with indigenous peoples, and that is the participation to the United Nations, because that is of course an institution of peace and human rights and so forth. So would that imply in its in depth that there would be space to consider how the indigenous people's participation to the United Nations can be thought further.
Yeah.
I,
Um, uh, uh, Interesting, and also glad that you brought that up, Thomas. Is the I think what you're referring to is the enhanced participation process of indigenous representative institutions to the UN. Yeah, to the UN. But before we go into that, which is also an agenda item further down the week, so we'll go much more deeper into that. Before you go into that, also keeping in mind to be a little bit of more value to people that are listening to this conversation. You as a indigenous representative, comma, president of the Sami Parliament, comma, yeah, you could say like an indigenous diplomat, or ambassador, or like anyway, you have a lot of experience at the international level. Give us a little bit of insight into what's the mindset is, and how you read or listen to contributions of states. Anything that you what goes through your minds, how you process it, so that other people have an idea of other of how to listen to contributions. I've learned from people like, for example, Kenneth Deere and a lot of these veterans out there, that something that indigenous people should also keep in mind is that the devil is in the details. So that's how I also always listen to statements from states. Yeah, explain a little bit, if you can, the process that you go through when you listen to an intervention from a state representative.
no, I mean, I think it's and I do try to listen a lot of the messages that are given, the attitudes, the content, and the signals that the statement is giving, what kind of readiness there is to work upon with issues, and what are their responses to direct fronts of issues or statements, telling about their situations in their countries. But I do think that, and it's a bit of my bad habit to try to read bit over what the states are indicating. But I think that the main importance is for me to read whether the state is an hostile, neutral, or positive towards the topic and issue what they are talking, and are they indicating some side stories from the main topic that they are talking about to be engaging with, or to be engaged, so that you would be able to push the agendas that we have as a movement, especially in the UN context. So that is something that I'm listening and trying to find out. Some countries aren't maybe that much talking about issues. They are talking about the importance of issues, but from few countries, it's a bit difficult to read what they are willing to do in a real world. For example, the statement from Spain was a kind of general example. What I read, that they were positive, they want to see improvement, but did we hear anything what they would be willing to do to actually reach in the UN context results? So it was a positive, neutral statement, I would say, as it didn't push any kind of aggressive agenda on behalf of indigenous peoples or together with them. So, but generally, it was not a negative statement. So, this is how always the way for me trying to kind of a little bit read the room and work in the UN system. The UN has many member states, nearly 200, and getting results need support. So it's always understanding and reading where they are in the bigger picture in different issues, so you can get an idea whether this country is helpful in our attempts to develop issues, or whether they are just neutral, or whether they are a difficulty for us.
Right. Also, interesting observation. Like you talked about, is the message, right? The wording that you choose. So, for example, during the Permanent Forum, you hear a statement that's being given, and take into account, for example, the Canadian intervention. The said that Canada said that they're leaders in the on Indigenous peoples and rights of Indigenous peoples under the UNPFII and the CBD to consider and respect and promote rights of Indigenous peoples in, for example, implementing the local communities and Indigenous people platform, saying that we as an international community must learn from Indigenous knowledge. You see, there's a consistency a little bit between these from a state side, from at least from not consistency, but like in terms of messaging, that there's somewhat similar under the UNFCCC as well as the Permanent Forum. However, in my experience, there's also inconsistency towards with a lot of different countries in terms of messaging when it comes to Permanent Forum, expert mechanism, and the UNFCCC, for example, that you always have to remind them of this has been discussed in Geneva or in New York or in Bonn. Is that something that you also take into account that when you listen to statements, and how do you go about that? How do you communicate with the state that is, in your view, a little bit inconsistent in messaging between, like say Geneva, New York, or Bonn?
Well, usually if you react after what the statement is said, you are a bit late already. You should try to kind of prevent issues happening. But that, of course, and understandably, is many times difficult for indigenous peoples, as they usually might not have the opportunities to actually talk with states and so forth. So it might be difficult. But but there are these inconsistencies. It is about securing that the capital is having the agenda of pushing indigenous issues, and then that the capital has done its job to inform the missions, the different branch of foreign affairs, or responsible ministers, that they are talking in line and have a common goal in all different arenas. I think Canada is a good example where in the enhanced participation process, I think they are talking quite consistent with the views. But of course, the country where I'm coming from, Finland, has many times had these inconsistencies, where especially the New York office and Geneva have not big differences, but maybe slight different use of language that plays a role in the negotiation settings. So you have to just front the issues and try to reach an understanding about the issues that you are dealing with. I mean, I don't know whether there is an easy solution to that. Difference from country to country. What is the national circumstances? What are the connections and so forth? So it is not that easy, of course.
Right. Thomas, you already alluded to it, and in the interventions today, we heard from Brandon Maka'awa from the nation of Hawaii talk about sovereignty, and he segued into also one of his requests or recommendations was to assist permanent observer status. Similar to that is the enhanced participation process that you talked about. Yeah, well, let me kick off with that. In your view, enhanced participation vis-a-vis permanent observer status, similar or different?
Similar.
Okay.
I think that the difference there is that we're trying to, in the enhanced participation process, to establish specific how do I say it, specific observer status. There are different observer status in the UN, so we're trying to build one common for indigenous peoples. But there is an opportunity currently to apply an observer status for international organizations, and that, of course, is something that we as a Sami parliaments are also considering. What kind of opportunities we have, but the end goal is the same: to be able to participate to the General Assembly's work, third committee that is big for human rights and so forth. So the end goal is same. The way to reach it is a bit different.
Right. So that people all know, and then let's spiel a little bit about this, Thomas, because I know you love to talk about this. So let me set you up a little bit so that you can talk at length about it. So when you talk about participation of Indigenous peoples at the United Nations, particularly the enhanced participation process, well, you're talking not about indigenous NGOs or indigenous peoples non-governmental organizations, but you're talking about representative institutions, meaning indigenous parliaments, assemblies, councils. What else do you have? Fora. In any way, it is the representative institution that represents the peoples. So a good example, because we have Thomas on this in this conversation. Thomas is the president of the Sami Parliament in Finland, and which is the representative institution of the Indigenous peoples on the Finnish side of Sami. so that's what we're talking about, representative institutions. The challenge before was, and this goes way back until 1923, 1924, when the Discahe of the Haudenosaunee Levi General, as well as spiritual leader T.W. Ratana from Aotearoa, New Zealand, tried to make their way to the League of Nations to address their concerns and claim their rights as distinct peoples. However, they were either denied to speak or not allowed to enter the League of Nations. And for your information, the League of Nations was the predecessor, if you will, of the United Nations. So that was in 1923, 1924. And between now and then, the UN has been created. And Indigenous peoples started. The first meeting was in 1977. Indigenous peoples came in. And we have the declaration ILO 169 in between, declaration in 2007. And Indigenous peoples for a very long time have only been able to participate in the United Nations as non-governmental organizations. However, in many instances, in many cases, Indigenous peoples are not represented by non-governmental organizations because they have their own governing institutions. They have their own governing systems. So the idea was to step away from that, so to making sure that we are recognized as peoples and are able to participate in the United Nations in that particular capacity as peoples. We saw a step being made by at the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, as well as the Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, by where you now can, if you participate or register, you can register as an Indigenous Peoples organization. That's a step forward. However, still you have representative institutions of the Haudenosaunee or the Nation of Hawaii or any Indigenous peoples that are being represented in a governing capacity, were not able to participate in the UN as in their role as leaders. A very significant occurrence was in 2019, I believe, when there was a session of the Human Rights Council during the Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and on enhanced participation process. And the significant detail of that meeting was that the current Discahe, because the Discahe it's not a person, it's a title, and that's what Kenneth has always told me. It's a title. The current Discahe was still not able to participate in his capacity as Discahe. So this enhanced participation process is not a process that was just kickstarted by the Alta Outcome document, theme 2, paragraph 10, but it is a almost 100-year process of Indigenous peoples trying to address their issues at the highest level and being having the status that consultative and participatory status as representative peoples to the, and in this case, enhanced participation is to the General Assembly. So that people have an idea that the nation of Hawaii wanted to go for permanent observer status, which is similar to the Holy See and Palestine, but yeah. So you also have observers to the General Assembly, like the International Olympic Committee. There are hundreds of entities that have observer status to the General Assembly, but permanent observer status is more a status that's equal, similar to the Holy See and the State of Palestine. So what Thomas is explaining right now is that for the Indigenous peoples, the enhanced participation process is to it's a different road, but trying to reach the same level of status. The same status within the United Nations. Why is that? for Indigenous peoples to Article 18 of Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the right to participate in decision-making processes that affect them. Meaning that it is up to the Indigenous people to decide which process does affect me. It's not up to the UN to decide which process does affect you. So that's what Article 18 says, and which derives from Article 3 of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the right to self-determination. This article, what it includes is that when Indigenous peoples, they feel that they need to be, they want to address their concerns with the General Assembly, Third Committee, for example, which is the committee on including human rights, they should be able to do that. They shouldn't have to go through an NGO or through a state to address their concerns at the UN General Assembly's Third Committee. The Conference of Parties under the climate change regime, the UNPFII, same thing. Right now, Indigenous peoples, when they want to participate under the climate regime, they have to go through an NGO, through a constituency, and then through an NGO. I can imagine that people or representatives from the likes of Thomas and the other presidents on the Swedish side and the Norwegian side, that they should be able to represent themselves or have the status not as NGOs but as representative institutions. And it all goes back to sovereignty. It's back to claiming your right to sovereignty as peoples, capital P and S at the end. Super important to mention that. So that's the enhanced participation status. It's a means towards influence decision making and policy. And one of the concerns that Indigenous peoples, not Indigenous peoples, the states have. Let me debunk that right away. One of the concerns that the states have is that Indigenous peoples are hanging on to this enhanced participation status to complain about issues, to complain to the General Assembly, to complain to the UNPFII COP and all the other instances. But let me focus on the General Assembly for the moment. That we are here, that we were going through the process to complain. That is absolutely not accurate. To put it in a better way, we're not there to complain. We're there to contribute. That's what we're trying to achieve with the enhanced participation process, to contribute to the work of the UN towards achieving peace. Now, when you talk about peace, justice, and strong institutions, like we have our institutions, we want peace because all our institutions are geared towards life, geared towards peace. So we're in the business of peace building. We're in the business of peace. We're not in the business of war and conflict. So our aim as Indigenous peoples is to achieve peace through our rights, through the same status that we have at the General Assembly. Sorry about that. I think this is the exact moment to ask Thomas, is that a good setup for you to explain where we are in the process, what people can expect from the process, and maybe be a little bit more informed for the agenda item follow up to the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples outcome document, which this whole thing falls under, which will be discussed by the end of the week. Unfortunately, only in 1 hour. Thomas. Anything I forgot, and maybe that you can go more deeper into the process.
I think that was a quite good reflection of what we're talking about. The United Nations was established for a fora of the peoples of the world, and I think that the only peoples that have been left out currently are the Indigenous peoples. Of course, it's a process for representative institutions that have the authority and the ability to talk on behalf of people. It would not be beneficial or right if we take an example of a people where you have 100 members and 15 of that people would establish an organization and claim to represent the whole people. You would have to have accountability when you are talking about of and on behalf of people that you actually represent that, and therefore this process have been designated to those institutions that represent indigenous peoples as a people, and therefore because their participation to the United Nations isn't allowed. Myself as a Sami Parliament president cannot openly register for UN events where we want to go. We have to find ways how to participate. The Permanent Forum and MRIP are having a registration status where you can register as an IPO and as an indigenous representative or parliamentarian institution, but do all others you cannot, and we cannot register as a Sami parliament. So, and in other processes we are kind of forced to be involved in the national delegation of a member state, in our case Finland. So that is the situation currently, and therefore for those that are and are capable of speaking on behalf of our people should be allowed to have access in the fora of the peoples of the world. So that is in another words explained the same issue what Ghazali was talking about. Now, well, the process is currently, there has been negotiations ongoing in 2015, 16, 17, but the member states were not able to reach a consensus on the matter, and the negotiation process was stopped and postponed, and it was thought to be reopened in the 75th session of the General Assembly, but due to the COVID pandemic situation, the process is still a little bit in a waiting status. Indigenous peoples are working globally with this work jointly, and Indigenous peoples have now nominated two candidates for the president of the General Assembly to consider to be nominated as the president's advisors for this process to reopen the talks between member states and indigenous peoples, how this new category for representative institutions of indigenous peoples could be established. So this is currently the situation, and Friday, sadly only 1 hour, we have discussions ongoing.
Let me pause you a little bit, because you talked about advisors. What do advisors actually, to your knowledge, what do advisors actually do? And you mentioned two advisors have been nominated. And yeah, can you explain who these two advisors are, so that people have an idea of, because an advisory role to the PGA is super significant. It's not people that do the dishes for the PGA. It is and PGA is meaning president of the General Assembly. So can you explain a little bit what the advisor does and who they are?
Well, the advisors are tasked on behalf of the president of General Assembly in the lead process. So basically, they are setting a roadmap and leading a process to a goal or towards a result, whatever the result is. So they are very much crucial on defining how the negotiations are done, with which kind of contact, who are participating to the process and so forth. So those are the most important roles from the procedural aspect of this enhanced participation process, because the president of the General Assembly itself is so busy task that a lot of UN and GA processes would never happen if the PGA would not nominate replacements, or how would you say it, others work on behalf of the president to reach results. The Indigenous peoples have worked with the enhanced participation issue, and there were a number of Indigenous peoples representatives gathered in Quito, Ecuador, to talk about this specific process, and they nominated Mr. Estebancio Castro Diaz from Panama and Mrs. or Madame Claire Charters from New Zealand to be the candidates of Indigenous peoples for the advisor of the PGA. This nomination was done after the Quito meeting was done, and it was also consulted, or there were dialogues among the regions that are or all the 7 regions, through the representatives that are in a temporary coordination body that is the tool how Indigenous peoples are having a dialogue on the matter globally on the process.
Right, and these advisors are they the only advisors? Are they going to facilitate or information from PGA towards the just Indigenous peoples, or also to states? How should I see it?
Well, the last time the PGA nominated 2 member state advisors and 2 Indigenous peoples advisors. So there is equality, and that was also raised today's session in the Permanent Forum, that you need equal settings to reach results and be respectful in that sense. So that is the idea here to reopen the process, that the states would nominate 2 and the Indigenous peoples would nominate 2. Currently, we don't know who would be the states that are willing to take this task and who are going to be nominated. Last process had the advisors from the member states at Finland and was it Ghana or Congo? Don't remember right now. Sorry for that. A country from African region. And then Indigenous advisors was Claire Charters, like I mentioned, from New Zealand, and then James Anaya from the USA side. And now we are hopeful that the PGA could nominate 2 Indigenous advisors and 2 advisors from the state sides.
Is this how big of a action item, or maybe even a priority, is this for the Sami?
Well, I would say one of the biggest priorities. Of course, if our participation is not welcomed in the United Nations, it would be a sad part, as we of course feel that we are equal towards other peoples, and we would like to contribute in this process of peace building, human rights, and the implementation of human rights. So that is of course something that we would like to be part of, and hopefully other member states could accept us and not to be ignorant or how you could even say racist towards us, and not allowing to be part in the discussions.
And do you think it as a protagonist of this process, right? So you have skin in the game. I would assume, I know that the Haudenosaunee is also in the process. They also have skin in the game. how do you go about, because not many Indigenous people know about this process. They're only dealing with permanent forum, expert mechanism, and special rapporteur at most, maybe even UNFII. But this seems like a very super important process for Indigenous peoples that, and I'm assuming, obviously, for Indigenous people that seek sovereignty, self-determination, independence. Is this a important process in your mind that they should follow? And if so, how can they participate in this process?
Well, this process, of course, is important for those that see this as important for them. It's of course, every people has to define themselves whether this is something that they would like to pursue. Of course, UN work can be felt million miles away from the problems and issues that you have on the ground where do you live. So that is, of course, also understandable. And if you don't want to be involved, that is, of course, respected and has to be respected. But for those that want to engage, of course, it is to be active and seek the and participate in the discussions on the matter and see that this is and show that this is often important to them. Of course, Indigenous peoples are having their own processes also on the matter, and participating to them, of course, is often important. The COVID situation, unfortunately, has changed the opportunities for us. We haven't been able to meet up and work together for a year and a little bit, almost for a year now, or over a year now. So our idea was that during last year's permanent forum that was not held, the Indigenous peoples would gather globally and establish more of a or establish a coordination body that would have a more of a openness or support and recognition from the Indigenous peoples as the temporary coordination body that has been established for this process by the Indigenous peoples representatives that were present in Quito meeting that I was mentioning before is of course a bit narrow, established by, of course it has a quite wide scale of support, of course, but Indigenous peoples would have more opportunities to talk about this coordination in permanent forum, physical meeting where people are more and more gathering as then you would have more of a openness and information shared. So it's unfortunate that we cannot meet currently in a global setting where Indigenous peoples are largely gathered as there this information and all thing could explain even more further. But I think that permanent forum and Friday's session will give one step forward on giving the information and show an example for Indigenous peoples. As to my understanding, the temporary coordination body will be speaking in the session, and that is a good opportunity for the coordination body to tell openly that we are functioning. We have representatives from 7 different or all of the 7 regions and so forth, and people then hopefully can reach out to these members of the coordination body, especially from their region, get involved and get information and give also and get also a bit of a picture where we are and what the process has been.
Right, and so the session on enhanced participation is on. Oh, sorry. The follow-up to the World Conference outcome document is on Friday. Looking at the speakers list, it's only 6 speakers. I assume you're speaking as well, Thomas. Any indication, if you can, obviously, of what the content will be of your remarks on that agenda item?
Well, yes, I will be most likely speaking, and if I remember correctly, would be first on the speaker list.
Wow.
But about the contact, I think that is something that we're still also a little bit still discussing and in a process on confirming the statement as it is considered to be an Arctic caucus statement. So that is something that, as it has not been decided formally, I would then, of course, not be in a position to tell that. But I think that um, um, maybe the main messages, of course, are the ensuring that the process continues and restarts again, then that indigenous peoples are taken as equal partners to the discussions to find a result that would be agreeable for all. But it's a 2 minutes statement, so this new way where Parliament Forum is going is building questions what is meaningful participation. I mean, it's of course a question. What can you say in 2 minutes actually that would give in-depth vision on a matter? So I do understand that, of course, everybody has to speak and you have to show certain kind of equality towards participants, but there is a point where participation and can be questioned whether it's meaningful if you are not even able to explain the basic elements to the matter that you are going to speak.
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned already. So you have only 2 minutes, only 6 speakers. However, people that you do want to have an in-depth discussion about it. All right, two questions. One is you talked about start this process again, meaning is it on pause? Is it did we it's because of COVID-19? Is it on pause? And when are we going to when is it going to restart again?
Yeah, as I was telling, the first round of negotiation was not successful.
Mm-hmm.
The member states were not able to find a consensus on the matter, so they decided to postpone the process to be renegotiated again during the 75th session. But as I said, the pandemic came, and especially the temporary coordination body has been trying to ensure that indigenous peoples from all over the world that want to engage this process would have the possibilities to participate. And therefore, this process has not been reopened and started, or the negotiations have not been restarted, as indigenous peoples would be in huge disadvantage to actually participate to discussions that would happen in New York when we cannot travel there. So when the pandemic is hopefully vanishing in the world in a half year or something, hopefully, then we are hopeful that this process could be restart again. But when the process is going to be restart, there isn't precise date for that. The advisors from the BGA that we have been talking earlier would be the ones that would build a process. They would identify what is important for a process, and that is, of course, where we need to be also active with counterpartners that we would firstly agreed together what is going to be the negotiation process, so that indigenous peoples would have the equal accessibility and an opportunity to be part of in these discussions. And when we would reach that understanding, hopefully then the process can start. But this is an ongoing situation. I mean, there isn't decided that would be the approach. I'm hopeful, and I hope that our work could result to that kind of steps. But there isn't no certainty. We are in an ongoing living world where we are hopeful and hopefully are able to get this kind of results happen. So yeah.
All right, let's further down the line, right? Let's say, and this is a question that came in as well. Let's say the representative institutions, including the Summer Parliament of Finland, Norway, Sweden, achieved permanent, not permanent service, enhanced participate, the enhanced status. All these indigenous peoples have representatives have to have these consultative and participatory status that was that they wanted to have per the Alta Outcome document and the Quito document. What happens to, and this is the question, is what happens to the indigenous peoples organizations that now are still participating within the UN? And I think if I interpret the question right, is let me give this a little bit of context for you. As you are a Manchester United fan, let's say, does this create a super league for indigenous representative institutions? Right, did this whole cocoon of indigenous councils, parliaments, and assemblies and everything else, and you have the rest in their old Premier League, league and all the. Is that? Should we be afraid of that? Is that happening? How do you see the post enhanced participation process?
No, I mean, no, that is not the case, and I'm actually thankful that you asked about this, because I seem to see that there are indigenous peoples and a lot of friends that I have met and worked together in the UN framework. I see that people are saying that this process is not for them, or it's challenging and building obstacles to their continued participation in the UN framework. This is not the case. The organizations, the NGOs would still have the same opportunities that they currently are having. The question is that allowing the indigenous representative institutions to have the opportunity to be part of a UN framework. And of course, I would say that it is natural that kind of institutions that are representing the peoples concerned, their natural place is in the same level where other peoples are. But this is not contradicting the NGO places or not allowing NGOs to speak about indigenous peoples. Of course, it would allow that to continue as it has been continued. Also, whether this process is ongoing or not. So it is not establishing a super league or any kind of that, and hopefully Manchester would not go for this kind of stupid ideas of building super leagues, elite groups. That is not the approach, but it is actually showing the equality and kindness for those that aren't currently able to participate in any form of way.
Yeah, thank you, Sachin, for clarifying that. Any while we talking about, and sorry to use that Super League analogy, but that's something that came up in my head as I read the question. Any other misconceptions about the enhanced participation process that you would like to address? Anything, misunderstandings maybe that should be clarified while I have you in the conversation?
Well, maybe I would front the question to listeners or for you also, that like why this process is seen so difficult. Is it because the core of United Nations is so protected that anybody from outside member state concept is not allowed to be part of the UN highest levels, not even in a process that they would only be speaking, not decision making, or why would indigenous peoples from different regions be skeptical of this process, because it is a certain kind of a process of fulfilling the rights of indigenous peoples. Why would we be afraid of that? Why would we be skeptical of, okay, that is not possible, the member states will never allow us to do this? Why? Because the same that kind of attitudes was already in the 70s and 80s, when they were fighting on the declaration to be established. But declaration has been established. And why peoples that have maybe difficult situations in international context would feel that member states will never ever recognize them as peoples. I do understand that circumstances in those areas are really difficult, and it might be even difficult to speak openly about these issues. And I do recognize that, and I don't support that kind of treatments and threats against indigenous peoples in any way. But why one of those most complicated, most in-depth aspects of self-determination would be left out from our work on trying to secure the realization of our rights? Why we would do that? If we all and in our indigenous rhetoric, we are always talking that human rights, indigenous people's rights, has to be fulfilled in its fullest scope. And so why we would not work in this manner on here too, when we have been claiming that indigenous rights has to be fulfilled and implemented in the fullest scope. So this is my question. I've seen that in the latest years, just in the latest before the pandemic, maybe 3 to 2 years, there have been little number of indigenous peoples working with the core human rights instruments, Human Rights Council, and this enhanced participation process. I'm not sure why this is the case here.
Yeah, it's hard to think of an explanation for that. Maybe a part of an explanation is it awareness? Is it funding, or is it just? Yeah, it is. It's a combination of it's and I think it's for Indigenous peoples not wanting to speak for all of them at the same time. But I can imagine that it is partly has to do with funding, partly has to do with awareness on the process that is out there. Unfortunately, Indigenous peoples, the bulk of them, we gravitate towards the expert mechanism, gravitate towards the permanent forum on indigenous issues, and also utilize the Office of the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. But there's so many more things out there that affect us. So in a way, when you talk about self-determination and the right to participate in decision-making processes that affect us, the MRIP and the permanent forum is one out of many processes that we should be engaging in. The treaty bodies, enhanced participation process, under CBD, under oceans, under desertification, CSW, the Convention on the Status of Women, there's so many processes out there that affect indigenous peoples, and we should all have participate in all these processes. So I can imagine that one is funding. That is a problem, and also the not knowing that this process is out there, and having the ability to participate in a process is something that not many indigenous peoples know about. And I think that's why it's having a conversation like this is super important, that to widen that scope of indigenous peoples, that there's more beyond the horizon that is called the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. It is, if you look at within the UN system, it is an advisory body to the Economic and Social Council. Expert mechanism is an advisory has an advisory role, a subsidiary, to the Human Rights Council. However, I do look at all these statements that you're hearing. Koike presented a statement about the current issues that are happening in the Amazon, and trying to plead for more space for life and land in these conversations, or for themselves, meaning asking for the Permanent Forum to help them. I think they would if you talk about teeth, right? Like the institutions that have teeth, of course you should use the Permanent Forum. Of course you should use the expert mechanism, but you should also use the treaty bodies. You should use the special rapporteur on the rights of indigenous peoples. And I see that for indigenous peoples that are looking at things holistically, we look too much one-dimensional at things, and it's just my personal perspective. That opinion, that we look too one-dimensional at things, whereas we should also be looking at, all right, what are the processes that we can utilize, that we can deploy, so that and it might go not directly from A to B, but it goes a little bit around it. Meaning, for example, the enhanced participation process, that you establish your representative institution as its status, so that you have direct access to the how should I say, the institutions and the bodies that have a little bit more teeth. Yeah, it is, for me at least, how I look at it. Not look at it. What I see, and I interpret what I see, is that we're still a little bit too one-dimensional, and we should be. And when you talk about levers, right? Like, it's not like pushing one lever all the way down, but multiple levers a little bit, so that you can make an impact. And one thing that I've learned from all this work and talking and working with people from the likes of Thomas, is that if you solve one thing within the UN system, there are still 99 things that you have to resolve to do that. Or if you want to fix one thing, you have to deal with 99 things. So it is one statement at the Permanent Forum, one statement as an expert mechanism is not sufficient if you really want to make change. So we have to do a lot more into using the system, and which includes a lot of things, which like the using the enhanced participation process. So it is not necessarily an answer to your question, Thomas, but more as an observation, and maybe also a small part of a explanation of why a process like the enhanced participation process is important for indigenous peoples.
But let me a little bit switch the roles, and sorry, I'm not going to overtake your brilliant cast and your role.
Sure.
But I think something that might be really interesting to hear also is that as our institutions that we do work are coming from a totally different kind of situations on human rights.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, generally speaking, I can be easily speaking about about these kind of issues with the government directly. I can access the government to talking about these issues like on a weekly basis. And there is a certain kind of recognition in the Finnish constitution as towards Samis, as indigenous peoples. So I am in a position whether the long work of my people have reached us to this certain extent, and your people are working and have been working for a long time too, and they are in the situation where you are. So how would you say how this process is meaningful to you, where we are dealing with a different kind of country on even human rights track record? I mean, comparing Finland and Indonesia, there are big differences.
Oh, 100%. It's a huge difference, and I think the your context, obviously, your direct access and to the Finnish government is at least for and I don't speak for all indigenous peoples in Indonesia or that have to deal with Indonesia, so say it correctly. But for in our context, it's not as it's not the same. It's not the same, and so the enhanced participation process is. I would say that we are the protagonist of it as well, as it as we have our own traditional or indigenous governing structure, or we have our sovereignty, and we used to be independent, and we're trying to regain that, but not on the metrics that is. Sorry, I should say correctly, on the metrics that we are used to. So based on our system and based on our traditional governing system. This process, it gives us the opportunity to elevate our status within the family of nations, which is if you look at the UN, it's a family of nations, or it's a gathering point of the family of nations. And this enhanced participation process, it gives us the ability to be at the table instead of having to create our own table or be not being at the table or serving the menu. Those are things that we do not want to, as indigenous peoples in general, but also as indigenous peoples, that we want to be, and we no longer want to be in that situation. So to get back to the desired situation where we want to be in, sovereignty and independence. So you have to be, and also taking into account that we want to do it on our own terms, through our own methods, and by respecting our own methods of governing and et cetera. I think the enhanced participation process is a pathway that is closer to us than, for example, going through permanent observer status, which is also open to any indigenous peoples as well. It's a lengthy process, though. I can tell you that I did a study on it, and it's a lengthy and challenging process. And if you want to have my observation on that, just drop me a line, email, whatever, and I'll send you the document. It is a lengthy process. So the enhanced participation process, it is, and I won't say it is less cumbersome. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it is much more feels like a bespoke suit, as in like it much more fits within within the way the way we work, the way we think, and this process definitely is something that indigenous peoples have been part of since the get-go. With it's I won't say it started, but like the kickoff was the Alta outcome document. Like I said, Team 2, paragraph 10, calling for the minimum purpose service status for indigenous peoples, representative institutions, as in parliament, assemblies, etc. That's what. So you could see that indigenous peoples have been in the car / driver's seat of this entire process for a very long time. So it is, we can shape it in any way, shape, or form we wanted to. So that's why it is the not only the why we participate in this NS participation process, but also the process itself, the road towards it, is also something that is more in line in Article 18 of the Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples, to participate in the decision-making process that affects you, that we're in the driver's seat, we're in that car, and with other Indigenous peoples, through the temporary committee, through the Quito document, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that is, from our perspective, why the NS participation process is super important. And that does not negate the fact that we should only focus on the NS participation process and leave everything as it is. It is, we have to walk multiple angles, of approaching from multiple angles. Some we have to pull, some we have to push, and NS participation process is one of them. And like Thomas said, it is a status, but and everyone has a different why. Everyone has a different reason to engage in this participation process. But also there's also a lot of Indigenous peoples that do this, engage in this process out of solidarity with other Indigenous people that are seeking. So the Indigenous people that do not seek enhanced participation, this enhanced consultative and participatory status within the UN, but they're supporting this work through out of solidarity, meaning that other Indigenous peoples want to do it. They can use our help, so we're supporting it. So that element as well, the element of solidarity, is super important. That we're all working towards similar goals. One is more priority than for others, but we all know that to achieve peace, one needs X, the other needs Y, and as Indigenous peoples, out of solidarity, because we are in a movement, that it can very well also include that we help each other in X and we also help each other in Y. So those are the reasons, one of the many reasons why we're engaging in this NS participation process. Out of the many you'll probably hear from Indigenous people's perspective on Friday during the session itself. And Thomas, maybe a final question is: any other events that have something to do with enhanced participation, or where enhanced participation is brought up, that Indigenous peoples can look forward to, engage in, that want to be more involved or want to learn more about this process?
Yeah, I mean, there is a plan of having a side event with the leading initial coming from Canada, and the temporary coordination party joining that, and there might be even some other states joining to hosting the side event, and that is something that is a good opportunity for Indigenous peoples to participate and learn and have dialogue also on the matter. I'm most certain that you will remember the time and place better than me right now, but
it's not looking good for you, my friend.
No, it's going to be like 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. For me that have been invited to chair this side event. So I hope that everybody can engage there and be part of that. If you are interested, Ghazali will give you the details. But one thing that I also think that it's crucial to remember in the enhanced participation element that even though my own institution, like the Sami Parliament, is engaging this heavily, it doesn't mean that Indigenous peoples' institutions have to be parliaments or councils or this kind of the kind of establishments, because the Alta outcome document highlights quite well what can be those institutions or those kind of forms of representation that should be taken into account. That they include traditional authorities, traditional ways of handling issues. So the interpretation of what kind of institutions could be engaging with this is in my view quite open and wide. So it is important to understand that in the Sami context, the Sami parliaments are the ones that are engaging heavily. But in different contexts, in different places of the world, it might be other kind of institutions that have a certain status or a certain kind of a role that can be engaging or benefiting from this process. So hopefully people are kind of thinking this open-mindedly. It's not solely for parliaments or nations or so forth that have been heavily involved, but also being visible in this process.
Right. I appreciate it, Thomas, for you dropping into this conversation. I'm not sure that you expected to be talking so long, but really appreciate you for answering questions truthfully and whilst your your connection is not always that good, but so appreciate you getting on this in this conversation. So let me bring it to a full circle, everyone. So today was on peace, justice, and strong institutions, the role of Indigenous peoples in implementing Sustainable Development Goal 16. Kicked off the permanent forum session with the study performed by on the theme of climate change and Indigenous peoples. Really was hoping that Hindou was be able to talk a lot more about that at great lengths. Maybe she can comment tomorrow in this conversation to talk a little bit more about climate change and Indigenous peoples. One of the recommendations that she brought up in terms of the role of traditional knowledge, and I like to say knowledge of Indigenous peoples, but that's a whole different conversation. So there were 4 elements that she brought forward. Was 1, the full respect for Indigenous peoples' rights in designing climate actions and policies. The second one was full participation of Indigenous peoples in local, national, regional, and international climate action planning. Third one, integration of Indigenous peoples and rights in climate planning documents. And then the last one recommendation that she brought forward was support for Indigenous peoples projects, including through dedicated financing mechanisms. Obviously, there's money makes the world go round. And so, the Indigenous peoples project need to be financially supported. The bulk of the conversation today was obviously on Sustainable Development Goal 16. There many things were addressed. I'm not going to even start or try to mention everything. Things that stood out is the key point. One is that you can count on Indigenous peoples for peace, never for war. So the institutions of Indigenous peoples are geared towards peace and justice. Indigenous peoples have their own institutions that. Like, for example, you have Thomas and this conversation as the president of the Summer Parliament in Finland. Some concerns were that governments are not respecting the right to self-determination of Indigenous peoples by inter alia. For example, one example was mentioned by the New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council, saying that they have the Uluru Statement from their hearts, which is a call for self-determination to the Australian government. However, it's not recognized or denied by the government. And right now what they see that structures are being set up or has been set up by the government that could undermine Indian people's self-determination, as in it is quote unquote a advisory and not a negotiating institution, or doesn't have those rights towards that extent. Same thing is happening, and you see those happening around the world, including Guyana, which established an Indigenous Peoples Commission question is that well, not question is, but people are skeptical when a indigenous institution is established by the state, or is being countered by the states. There's a plea for more space for life and the right to life and the right to land. Particularly, that particular plea came from Quaker. As we all know, in the Amazon, the situation is now dire, not only concerning COVID-19, but also regarding the administrations that are there at the moment. So please keep an eye on whatever is developing in the Amazon. And we also paid attention to the words that representatives use. For example, in the intervention that was made by the representative of the United States, that said there was that there's on a global scale to bring global peace, they will quote unquote seek input from indigenous peoples and build peace around the world. Seek input is what triggered myself, and what I gathered from Thomas is that it's super important to look at about the context, why it's like how people say it, what they say, and what are they trying to say, and don't take words at face value, but look at everything that has to deal with the particular words that they use in their intervention. And then also one final point, which is maybe an interesting point to dig deeper into a new room, is when it talk about radicalism of indigenous peoples. Albert Barume, currently the coordinator of the panel of experts on Mali for the UN Security Council. Wanted to discuss a little bit about the concept of peace as an extremism is affecting indigenous peoples, and he feels that states need to see indigenous peoples as partners and to fight extremism and radicalism. And begs the question is, are states interpreting the declaration in the right way? As the declaration proposes a new partnership of indigenous peoples and states on an equal level to address issues that concern them both. However, what he says is that states call indigenous peoples at the moment, in many cases, extremists and or terrorists. So he pleads for a reset of the relationship between indigenous peoples and states, and tries to and puts it for the permanent forum members as well as indigenous peoples themselves on finding ways to convince the Security Council and its member states, or the UN and its member states, to see indigenous peoples as partners, while at the same time are also prime victims of radicalism and extremism. So that is in a nutshell what has been discussed today. I'm super grateful that Thomas was able to sit it out with me for the duration, and because we also talked about the looking ahead. The agenda of the permanent forum is also on Friday, same time, so that will be 11 a.m. New York time. On the not 11 a.m. 9 a.m. 9 a.m. 11 New York time. The discussion on the follow-up to the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples outcome document, as well as the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. So we already talked a little bit about the enhanced participation process, which derives from the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples outcome document, and what we can expect, what is going to listen to, and potentially there's a side event for people that are interested that will occur on Tuesday 27th. What time? I think it's 6:30 p.m. New York, Ottawa time. I'll get you the details before people show up too early or too late. But one thing for sure, it will be very late for people from the likes of Thomas and myself, because for me already it is the side event will be at 1 a.m. Paris, Rome, Amsterdam time. Yeah, so that was a lot. Everyone, thank you for joining the conversation in the chat as well. Appreciate it. And Thomas, thank you so much for sticking it out with me. And looking forward to further conversations tomorrow. After the end of the third day of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, we'll continue the discussion with the Green Room. So people that are interested, you want to share something, talk about something, drop your 2 cents. You can join the conversation in this live stream. We'll continue for 2 hours at the most, and is a place to process everything. That's it for me. And hope you have a great evening, a night, or day. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Have a great day. See you guys, everyone.